In this point 3, we are going to see, to talk about the international relations in Europe during the 17th century. In reality, we had already indirectly mentioned some of the major events of it in the previous units about the Habsburgs, where it was a quite turbulent century with a huge war that determined many of the changes of powers during the century, the 30 Years' War that started as something local and then moved to something more at an international level. And then, like its consequence, its continuation, that is the Franco-Spanish War, that we can say that is a spin-off of of the unsolved problems between Spain and France that had been fighting in separate sides. The outcomes of these wars, as we already know, were terrible for Spain, and also confirmed the importance of France as the central power in Europe on the 17th century. National politics in Europe in the 17th century were determined by the 30 Years' War. This war, as many of the conflicts that also had occurred in the previous century, had a religious origin. In this case, it started in a part of the Holy Roman Empire when the new Catholic Emperor Ferdinand II was elected king in Bohemia. He started to persecute or to limit the religious freedom and tried to started to close and tried to stop the construction of Protestant churches, which made him very unpopular. Remember, since this was something that had been going on for a long time in both directions, every move in this sense was taken as bitterly by the other side. It went as far as that in the year 1618, the representatives of the king were captured by a group of Protestant nobles, and they were thrown away by the window of the palace. This event is known as the defenestration of Prague. Okay, so defenestration means that's when you throw something out of the window, and it started the Bohemian Revolt, so the revolt in what is now the Czech Republic. So soon this revolt that had started in this region of the Holy Roman Empire spread through all the rest of the Holy Roman Empire. And soon the division between Protestants and Catholics started to grow, and more countries, even countries that were, not territories of the Holy Roman Empire, were involved, and basically they got involved in with the interest of gaining influence and territories. So this was going to be the beginning of a very long and devastating war. So here in this map we can see the division of territories. So although it took place in some regions of Germany, different regions, because as different countries got involved, newer scenarios came up. But we can see on green color the Protestant side, so the German states that were Protestant altogether, including Prussia, that is here, supported by the Scandinavian countries. Look here that at this moment Finland belonged to Switzerland, and Norway belonged to Denmark. And look here, it's interesting how France supported the side of the Protestants, although in reality France and the French king was not Protestant himself, but his political interest went in this way because this meant fighting the Habsburgs, in this case the Habsburgs of Austria. So lately, as the war advanced, the Habsburgs, with their territories, received the help of the Habsburgs in Spain, that at this moment was Castile, Aragon, also Portugal, and the south, like two Sicilies. Yeah. So a lot of territories were involved. In this case, as you can imagine, in reality, I mean, the only thing that really affected Spain were these territories that Spain had been already fighting to try to keep Flanders with it, this had started in the late 16th century, and it had been, as you remember, a highly, very costly conflict for Spain. That was like Spain won some battles, but it just meant huge efforts and a huge debt. So at the end, the Catholic side of the German Emperor Ferdinand II and its ally Spain were defeated. As they signed the Peace of Westphalia, they put an end to this 30 years war. The results are quite complex, but mainly mean that the Holy Roman Empire was weakened because the emperor lost even more power. Remember that with Charles V, he had ended up admitting the religious freedom of the princes, but now he also had to admit more political autonomy and more independence and more limitation of the power of the emperor, and a confirmation of this religious complete freedom, not only of the princes but also of the people in the state. And obviously this weakened the position of Spain, that finally had to recognize not only its defeat in the 30 Years' Wars, but also in the 80 Years' War. That is the war that had started with the conflict with the Low Countries. They had to recognize the independence of the United Provinces, and at the same time, France got reinforced from this. France was on the winning side, and basically they had got involved because they wanted to weaken the Habsburgs, and they not only politically and in terms of influence, they increased their position and their territories, but also they increased some territories in some German territories. Here we see, and this explains the spin-off of this war, that is the Franco-Spanish War, because as France incorporated territories here before the end of the war, because this is a spin-off of the Franco-Spanish War started before the Treaty of Westphalia, Spain had to fight in order to try to maintain a connection to the Low Countries that were still at stake, and also because they still had claims on Milan and France too. So long story short, at the end, this spin-off of the 30 Years' War between Spain and France ended up in 1659. And although at the beginning it was not very clear who was winning the war or not, the fact that it was being extremely expensive for both sides ended up pushing to signing a treaty. And in this treaty, Spain had to give away even more territories. So France annexed the Roussillon. The Roussillon was the only territory that belonged to the Spanish monarchy that was across the Pyrenees. So we lost that. And then also a marriage between Philip IV's daughter, Maria Teresa, was arranged with King Louis XIV. This is important to understand what was going to happen at the end of the century. When France had a strong influence over Spain during the reign of Charles II, that was a very weak period for Spain. And this marriage between Louis XIV and Maria Teresa was going to be determinant, for France to force the will of Charles II on the future Philip V of Bourbon. So this consolidated like the main position of France in Europe in international affairs and the definite decline of the Spanish monarchy. That is something that will just continue in the 18th century.